This is the first video I've ever made without a hat on. That feels weird. What's going on, guys? This is Ty Reke the Tech Geek here, back again, and today we're going to be doing another 1 month review of the bigger brother to the last device that we did a 1 month review on, the iPhone 14 Pro, and that is the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, I've been using the 14 Pro Max for about a month now, just about 3 weeks, almost a month. And it's only reinforced why I tend to get larger variations of phones. Yes, the 14 Pro is easier to hold in the hand. It was easier to type on one-handed, but they share a lot of the same features and a lot of the same perks, except for screen size and battery life, obviously. So essentially, much of what I said in the last video about the 14 Pro, just like Control-C, Control-V it into this video. The colors are all the same from the 14 Pro to the 14 Pro Max. You can either get it in space black, gold, deep purple, or silver, which is the model that I got for myself. First off, the design of the actual iPhone 14 Pro Max, it's just as stellar as what you'd come to expect from a Pro model iPhone, especially on the silver color, which I really wanted to get this year because I've never had a silver model phone. I typically either got black or some other color, but the pure white on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, instead of like the off-white that we've seen in past variations, looks really good, and it helps distinguish from a lot of fingerprints. It doesn't hold a lot of fingerprints unless we're talking about the stainless steel bezel, in which case it holds more fingerprints than a fucking crime scene. But the actual look of the phone is absolutely marvelous. I love it. I love it so goddamn much. You get the same exact chip as on the 14 Pro, the new A16 Bionic. You get a lot of this, you get all the same camera specs, a 48 megapixel main lens, 12 megapixel telephoto, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide, along with IP68 water resistance and 6 gigabytes of RAM with 4 different storage options. So right around the same as what you would expect for a Pro model iPhone. But there are a few key advantages to getting this phone over the iPhone 14 Pro. Mainly, that's going to be in the screen size, the battery life, and in the overall comfortability of a larger model iPhone. So for example, if you have larger hands or don't like typing on a small screen because the keyboard might be a bit too small for you to type comfortably, this is going to be the iPhone for you, or another iPhone that we're going to be reviewing on later. But the actual typing experience on a larger display with a larger keyboard just means more space for your fingers to wiggle around and do all the typing that they need to do without really feeling like you're straining or having to look at the screen too deeply because the screen is so small. So if that tends to be a problem for you, then the iPhone 14 Pro Max is going to be the phone that you're going to want to choose for yourself. Second is the 6.7-inch screen size. This is going to be a main advantage for anyone who wants a larger display for absorbing more content, such as watching YouTube, watching Netflix, watching Hulu, gaming. That 6 gigabytes of RAM goes a long way too. It's an absolute powerhouse when it comes to gaming, and that 120 Hz ProMotion adaptive refresh rate makes the screen look buttery and smooth in whatever it is that you're doing. Of course, it depends on what it is that you're doing, but if you're watching content or gaming and just want a nice, big, fat display to enjoy all of it on, that's the 14 Pro Max is going to be the device for you. The third main advantage is, of course, going to come in the battery life department. You know, bigger phone, bigger battery. Of course, that's how it always goes. The 14 Pro Max is going to come with a 4,323 milliamp hour battery, as opposed to the 3,200 milliamp hour battery that we have on the 14 Pro, which is a significantly large jump in battery size, but overall both phones are going to have great battery life. The iPhone 14 Pro is marketed for 29 hours of playback time. Of course, that's going to depend on your use case. So I've had this phone since October 3rd, and on October 10th, I performed my own battery test. So I started out my morning at 9:30 a.m. on October 10th with 100% battery life, and I got all the way to the next day, or the next night rather, October 11th, with it finally dying at 10:23 p.m. So I definitely got more than 29 hours of battery life. But of course, that's going to depend on your usage patterns and how you use your phone, whether it's going to be a lot of gaming, a lot of video taking, a lot of taking photos, a lot of just doing a lot of activities on your phone. So of course, your battery life is going to differ from mine, but just keep that in mind when you're using your phone. Now on the 14 Pro Max, you still get the two main features that will come with the iPhone 14 Pro model phones this year. And of course, that is the dynamic island and the always on display. The dynamic island, of course, being my favorite feature to come to the iPhones this year. And if you watch my previous video reviewing the iPhone 14 Pro, you'll know that whenever I went back to using my iPhone 13 Pro Max for any period of time, I would constantly feel like I was missing something because I wouldn't have the always on display and I wouldn't have the dynamic island, and it would really affect my usability and enjoyability of my iPhone. So I would constantly switch back to my iPhone 14 Pro. But now luckily I don't have to choose, and neither do you, because you can either get the iPhone 14 Pro or the Pro Max depending on how comfortable you want it to be. Of course, on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, you also get newer features that are kind of flying under the radar as of right now, such as crash detection, which I hope no one has to test out, and emergency SOS satellites, which is going to be rolling out later on this year for uses on all the new iPhone 14s, whether it's a Pro, Pro Max, 14 Plus, or 14. In all honesty, after using my 14 Pro Max for about a month, I have to say nothing has really changed from the actual usability from it, from using my iPhone 13 Pro Max. If I'm going to be real with you guys, going from the 13 Pro Max to the 14 Pro Max is kind of like dating a new girl who has the same haircut as your ex-girlfriend. I mean, it's okay. You can do that. We all make bad choices. It's okay. There are a couple key differences between these two phones. Of course, you have the A15 Bionic on this phone and the A16 Bionic on the 14 Pro Max. But really there isn't really a lot of difference between the two when it comes to CPU performance, whether it be in multi-core or single core. As you guys can see on the screen here, there really isn't that much of a difference. The A15 Bionic is still a powerhouse of a chip and is going to be a powerhouse for years to come. So if you're worried about getting the newest chip or having the highest performing chip, you really don't need to worry about it when it comes to the iPhone 14 Pro Max coming from the 13. So if you have a 13 Pro Max, you can probably stick with it unless you absolutely want to go to the iPhone 14 Pro Max. The other differences are pretty easy to explain. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is going to come with the newest features, such as the always on display. Apple's implementation of it is my favorite implementation of it compared to Android. And of course, you get the dynamic island, which will give you some more software tweaks and more usability with apps such as Apple Music, setting timers, just so you don't have to go back to those apps. So you have a little bit of software room up at the top of the display to interact with it and actually see what's going on without needing to go all the way back to that app. So going to the 14 Pro Max does have some advantages to it, but I don't see the normal consumer or the average person really using those things, at least consciously. They might notice it one day and think, oh, that's pretty cool. But I don't think that's going to be something that the average person is going to be consciously seeking out, unless you are an enthusiast like myself, like some other people. The always on display and the dynamic island shouldn't be things that are a make or break for you when it comes to getting the iPhone 14 Pro Max over the 13, because the iPhone 13 Pro Max is still a monstrous phone in terms of CPU performance, in terms of battery life, in terms of camera quality. And speaking of camera quality, another one of the differences is going to be the 48 megapixel main lens on the iPhone 14 Pro Max compared to the 12 megapixel main lens on the 13 Pro Max. The only caveat with that is you only get the 48 megapixel main sensor if you're shooting in Pro RAW. And I'll tell you the truth, I'm always shooting in Pro RAW. Let me tell you, it's just a better overall experience shooting in Pro RAW. You know what I mean? It just looks better, it feels better, it sounds better. But overall, guys, after about a month of using my iPhone 14 Pro Max, it's turned into my main phone from my iPhone 14 Pro. I do love the smaller display or the smaller hand size you get with the iPhone 14 Pro, but having the larger display for things like typing, gaming, watching and absorbing content, it's just so much more enjoyable on a larger display like you get on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. The Geekbench scores or CPU performance between the two phones really aren't that noticeable. Same with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but if you want a phone with astronomical battery life, amazing performance, a lot of new camera features, and a lot of new software features, you're gonna want to go with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. But of course, to you, Apple, off with the eSIMs. Please, take it away. Take them all away. Please, leave us alone. But guys, this has been my 1 month review of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. If you or someone else you know is looking to pick up the iPhone 14 Pro Max, I'll leave the shopping links down below. Right now, the iPhone 14 Pro Max in the 128 gigabyte configuration does start out at $1,100. And it goes up about $100 to $200 depending on what gigabyte configuration you're looking for. In the US market, they only have eSIM. In other countries, besides for the United States, you'll get a physical SIM card. But if you're in the United States and you want to go traveling overseas, just make sure that any carrier that you're going to be using overseas does support eSIM, because that can be a huge pain in the ass and can really make it a rough time. So make sure you figure that out before you actually pick up a phone like this. Oh, and I forgot, the 2000 nits peak brightness outdoors. Yeah, that's killer too. Forgot to throw that in there, but there you go. But anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This has been Ty Reke the Tech Geek with my 1 month review of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.